Mesopotamia refers to an area in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The name Mesopotamia translates to land between two rivers and occupied the area we now know as Iraq. Early in the history of Mesopotamia, many tribes were fighting each other for the rights to the land. These tribes had their own cultures and inventions, like the Ubaidians, who had introduced agriculture to the area and developed trade industries with the other tribes with pottery and metalwork. Through the fighting, the tribes were eventually defeated and or conquered by the Sumerians. The Sumerians are credited with creating the first major complex civilization in known history, with Eridu being the oldest city in Sumer and, by extension, the world. Mesopotamia was a flat, fertile plain that would get flooded a few times a year by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Because of this, irrigation systems were created by building embankments, draining marshes, and digging canals and ditches from, at first, only the Euphrates River. Sumer had a city-state society, and their ruling class was called the Ensis. Villages were built on man-made mounds to prevent flooding within the village, and it is believed that the Ensis were the only people authorized to control the irrigation systems and were tasked with maintaining them. Within the villages, houses were small and close together, some being 2 stories high, and the village itself was surrounded by a wall for protection. The poorer people would live in small huts outside of the wall, which is a clear sign of social stratification, which is one of the many signs of a complex society. The main crops grown by the Sumerians were barley, emmer, which is a wheat-like crop, beans, olives, grapes, and flax. Large temple buildings were of great value in Sumerian society, and often held treasure, stored tools and foodstuffs, held workshops, and quartered priests, officials, singers, and many more people. In the fields, early domesticated animals did work, like oxen pulling carts and plows, and donkeys serving as pack animals. But before oxen and donkeys were domesticated, dogs were domesticated, and they were used for hunting purposes. The world's earliest known writing system was also developed in Mesopotamia. The cuneiform writing system was the first writing system with rules to how it should be written, instead of just drawing pictures like what would have happened before with the proto-writing systems. With the cuneiform writing system came a few things: schools to teach the writing system, common use of writing in everyday life, and works of fiction like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Schools would teach the cuneiform writing system and other topics, and people would graduate only after mastering writing. This would take years. They would write on clay tablets so that if they messed up, it would be easy to reshape the tablet and try again. In everyday life, writing was used to file complaints, make stupid jokes, just like we do now, and create records of every trade that occurred in Mesopotamia. Due to the trade developing past local areas, cuneiform was extremely useful for communication and trade with others that didn't speak the same language. Due to the idea that peaceful trade with others was cheaper and better than conquering other societies prevailing, Mesopotamia is also seen as the beginning of entrepreneurship. Due to the detailed record-keeping of the Mesopotamians, evidence of new technologies being traded is clear to see, and the first legal contracts also started showing up in Mesopotamia. All of these are parts of entrepreneurship today. Sumerian trade was extensive, and they had sailing vessels that are believed to have been able to reach the Indus River in India. With extensive trade comes the need for standardization, meaning the first standardized weight system was also developed in Mesopotamia. I'll talk more about that a bit later. Back to cuneiform. The first known piece of literary fiction is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a massive story that we still have not found all the parts to yet. It is the earliest known piece of literature to have stories of monsters and gods, and shows just how similar we are as people to the citizens of ancient Mesopotamia. Today, we use writing for the same reasons as they would have, and that's just a cool thing to see. Sumerians also made the first law codes, with Hammurabi's code being a notable example of one of the early Mesopotamian law codes. Though not the first, it is famous for being tough but fair. The punishments were brutal, but they fit the crime and acted as a good deterrent to any would-be criminal. Sumerians were the first to make a calendar, and they had advanced mathematics, which I'll touch on a bit later. Their calendar was divided into 12 months and had a total of 360 days, which is remarkably similar to the calendars of today. It was shown in a circle, making each day on the calendar a degree on the circle. To make sure the calendar wasn't offset each year, an extra month was added every 4 years, which was their leap year. In Sumer, there were 12 major cities before the civilization fell during Ur's supremacy. I'm not going to say the names, but they're on screen now. One of the cities, Uruk, was a sprawling city that was at the center for trade in the region and had a large population, believed to be anywhere from 40,000 to 80,000 people at its peak. Although the Sumerian civilization fell, the following Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian civilizations still used the knowledge and methods created by the Sumerians, passing down and refining the ancient techniques. In Sumer, the system of counting was a base 60 system, where there were symbols to denote the numbers 1 through 59. Then the number would switch place to show how many 60s went into the number being shown, much like the clocks we have now. Alright, so the base 60 system works almost exactly like how our clocks work. Our clocks count, 0 through 59, right? So in here, it can range from 0 to 59. Once this hits 59, when it rolls back over to 0, this will become 1, and this would again become 0. So this indicates that we have one set of 60 minutes already counted, which is exactly how the base 60 system would work. They would count 1 through 59. They didn't have a symbol for 0 like we do, but as soon as it would hit 60, they would just use the same symbol they had for 1, and any number after 60, they would just add the symbols for the numbers. So say if we wanted to count, 87, it would be 160 plus 27. This system was called the sexagesimal place value system and was only used for mathematics. Within the system, there were many standardized measurements for length, capacity, volume, weight, and area. And using the math of the time, Sumerians could correctly calculate the volumes and areas of simple shapes. For example, length measurements were fingers, which measure about 17 millimeters, cubits, about 50 centimeters, seed cubits, about 1 meter, reeds, about 3 meters, and rods, about 6 meters. The measurements for other things like capacity matched fairly well with the metric system, while others that they used did not. Much like today, schools taught students math, and practice problems would be given out on the same clay tablets that they would use to learn cuneiform writing. Let's revisit irrigation. In Sumer, surface irrigation was used, and the flow of water due to gravity was taken advantage of. There were two main ways of irrigating fields at that time, the basin way and the furrow way. In both cases, canals were dug at the upper edge of the fields, and for the basin type, which is the most basic and widely used across Mesopotamia, fields were divided into multiple units with pretty much flat surfaces, with banks around the units dug deep enough to hold water. Water would be allowed into the channels, the soil would absorb a lot of the water, and any excess water was removed afterwards. For the furrow type of irrigation, water ran through narrow channels in the field down a slope, and there was no excess water, with the trade-off being that not everything got saturated with water. Canals were built to make sure water was held during the dry summer months, and these canals allowed more foreign trade due to ease of access to the large cities. When flood season did happen, the water stayed within the canals and didn't flood over the fields or into the villages due to them being built on mounds. This may sound amazing, but in the long term, it hurts the fertility of the soil. When the rivers flooded, a layer of silt would be deposited on top of the land, helping keep the salt levels in the soil low and allowing the land to stay fertile. When societies began using irrigation, this flooding stopped, and salt levels within the soil rose dramatically over time. This meant that the soil was getting worse and worse for the crops being grown. And it's believed that the major crop switched from the wheat-like emmer to barley because of the higher salt tolerance. Irrigation is no doubt a huge leap forward in technology, but the long-term effects it had on the fertility of the soil was unsustainable for Mesopotamian societies.
Bradley, this game is free.
I wouldn't pay for it.
Well, you
Who
can
am I
pay $1
joking?
for
I'd pay
yourself.
for it.
What the
What
fuck?
the fuck was
That was the golden Freddy of this game.
Wait, did Car say get that guy?
Yes. Got him. Oh.
I can't tell if this is in Garn or fucking Gmod.